What if the happy ending isn't the good ending? What if living happily ever after only will destroy you, make you unable to shoot your arrow beyond your bow, and make you the most contemptible being on the planet, the last man? Today, on Smokes from the Underground, we're going to be talking about Friedrich Nietzsche, a 19th century German philosopher who wrote a book which is considered his magnum opus called Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where a prophetical character named Zarathustra comes down from the mountains and imparts wisdom to the masses. And one of the concepts he talks about is contrasting the Ubermensch with the last man. Today I'm smoking a Boswell Twist. And I'm getting towards the end of this pipe here because I was sitting and thinking about Nietzsche. But I'm smoking some Boswell's Northwoods, a great little English aromatic. Before we get into it, cheers. A buddy of mine left this at my house. I'm not a big fan of it. This is actually Jägermeister. But it is German, so I thought it would be fitting to have this beverage. And although it kind of makes me shake a little bit and shiver when I take a shot of it, Ubermensch is a man who embraces overcoming. And I will overcome this shot of Jaeger here for you today. Cheers to you fellow Ubermensches out there. Not a big fan of black licorice flavor. Anyway, Jaeger has that stag with a cross in between its antlers. So that is the St. Hubert's cross, St. Hubertus, who is the patron saint of hunting. And in Catholic lore, St. Hubert was a nobleman who was out on a hunt, and he saw a stag with a crucifix in between his antlers. He gets down on his knees. He renounces his vain and based lifestyle, or debased lifestyle, and decides to give his life to Christ. But the funny thing is, that wasn't always a cross in between those antlers. It's German, and it came out in 1932, so it actually had another symbol in between those antlers, and I bet you could guess what that is. Pretty interesting how Jägermeister and BMW and Volkswagen all managed to shed their blighted brand perception and become mainstream. But the Jaeger actually apparently also had stag's blood in it at one point. So it's got an interesting history, and I want to like it, but it's just kind of one of those things where it makes my skin crawl a little bit. But I overcame that shot, and that'll be the theme here. So what is the last man? And what is an Ubermensch? Well, Nietzsche argues that the last man is sort of this warning and sort of this end state that men will reach, where scarcity has been resolved and they no longer want for basic comforts. They have those, and they no longer strive for greater ideals, and they live in this state of comfort and security, and it causes them, like he says, to not be able to shoot their arrow beyond their bow, to not be able to overcome themselves and move forward. He says, in many ways, comfort and happiness are the enemy. The man who looks in the mirror and no longer despises himself, becomes this just pathetic man. It's pretty dark, pretty cynical stuff. And Nietzsche does have a cynical view on life. He's dying of a degenerative brain disease and is this great genius. In that disease is very familiar to him because he watched his father succumb to the same disease. His father was a Protestant minister. I'm not sure which denomination, but a man of God, and by all accounts, a really great, intelligent, and benevolent man who Nietzsche really looked up to as his hero. And he watched this man die, and he had beef with God after seeing this. And he had a very cynical outlook. And when he started to develop those symptoms and succumb to the same disease, well, that's when you get passages written in blood. Nietzsche wrote that if it's not worth writing unless you're willing to write it in blood, literally sever yourself, take your blood, and then put it in a pen or a quill and write it down. That unless you're willing to do that, it's not even worth writing it down. And, he often says that it takes him one sentence to convey ideas, that it takes other men a whole book to convey. And that sounds super braggadocious and exaggerated, but when it comes to Nietzsche, it's actually true. So this is not a book that you're able to just storm through. I read about 50 pages of it the first time I picked it up, and I realized very quickly I had no freaking clue what I just read. Nietzsche also says in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "I am a railing next to a swift current. Grasp me if you can." And that is very true. And you really have to just pick it apart page by page and think about it, because he was so sick and feeble that he would get the strength to lean forward out of his bed and write a few sentences and fall back in exhaustion. And then sit there and think all day about the next few sentences that he would write. And it reads like that. He talks about the Ubermensch. There are a lot of misconceptions about what he means by that. And of course, just like Jägermeister, which was all too fitting for this video, there's some fascistic and National Socialist connotations, because the Nazis very much took Nietzsche's ideology and sort of twisted it to kind of meet their political preferences, I guess you could say. But what Nietzsche actually meant by the Ubermensch was a man who is willing to embrace chaos, scarcity, and struggle and overcome it. Sort of become obsessed with the overcoming of those hardships. And it would allow for that man to become truly great. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't creature comforts that gave birth to that greatness. It was the struggle and the overcoming of those struggles in the pursuit of higher ideals, which he doesn't really define. And he even argues that the Ubermensch can create those higher ideals. Almost reminds me of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, where they say, you have to believe in a higher power. It doesn't necessarily need to be God, but, create your higher power and believe in that. And this is an incredibly powerful and haunting concept. Because if you were truly given everything that you've ever wanted, everything that you've ever needed, and didn't have to work for it, would you be a better man for it? Or would you betray yourself and sit and rot and become something that you hate? It's not an easy bite of steak to chew on. Nietzsche does accurately predict World War One and or not World War One, World War Two, and the replacement of God with ideology, communism and fascism, and all of the horrors and the deaths that would come out of that. And when he says that our end state will be this last man, I believe him. And I think just like his other predictions, that's where we're headed, if not already there. In 2025, I can't help but connect it to artificial intelligence. You know, people talk about, well, this is going to replace people's jobs. We're all going to be, out of work. Then there's a social responsibility to take care of everybody who's out of work with universal basic income. And you have futuristic luxury space communism, or whatever the meme is that people say. But Nietzsche argues that if we ever actually discovered happiness, if we ever actually got to the point where all of our needs were met and we were perfectly comfortable, we would burn the system down out of boredom, because what we actually crave is the struggle. What we're biologically primed to do is to overcome challenges. And in the absence of that struggle, we lose our minds. And I wonder what happens and how man searches for meaning when scarcity is solved, when world hunger is solved, when we have a one world government and everybody is happy and connected. Even if it were possible to get to that point, and I'm not saying that it is, would that be the end state? Maybe not. Maybe we burn it all down and just start the cycle all over again. Kind of foreshadowing my next philosopher that I'm going to be covering in Smokes from the Underground, who kind of takes this concept a step further. But I think I'll leave you with that, with those depressing thoughts right before Christmas. This has been Smokes from the Underground. Cheers.